Infanta Sofía is undergoing medical treatment for problems that worsened in Wales. There's something about the relationship between a mother and her daughters that becomes more complex with time. Especially when the mother is in the public eye, and her daughters are growing up under constant watch, not just from the press but from the expectations placed on royalty. Queen Letizia of Spain, once a journalist herself, has always been known for her elegance, discipline, and focus, especially when it comes to the well-being of her two daughters, Princess Leonor and Infanta Sofía. From their earliest years, Letizia has tried to shape not just their values but also their physical habits, hoping to instill in them a sense of self-respect and responsibility. Some say she's been too strict. Others call it love wrapped in caution. But as many mothers have learned with time, even the best intentions can sometimes lead to unintended consequences. Especially when the children begin to grow up and explore the world for themselves. At the Zarzuela Palace, where the royal family resides, Queen Letizia enforced a dietary regimen that, by all accounts, was extremely strict. There were no sugary cereals or late-night snacks, no fast food or fizzy drinks. Instead, meals were prepared with precision, low in fat, low in calories, and seasoned with nothing more than salt and pepper. Letizia believed, with conviction, that food should be functional, clean, and health-giving. Her daughters were to learn that nourishment was not about indulgence but about care, about respecting the body. About discipline, about control. And in the context of palace life, where everything was scheduled, curated, and quietly scrutinized, Letizia's approach made a certain kind of sense. She was, after all, raising future leaders in an environment that allowed little room for mistakes. But childhood is not meant to be lived entirely within a glass case. And for Sofía, the youngest daughter of the Spanish monarchs, that truth became real the moment she left home for school abroad. It was in Wales, a far cry from the manicured order of Zarzuela, that she encountered a different kind of freedom, one that came not with rebellion but with discovery. Away from the royal kitchen and her mother's careful eye, Sofía experienced what many teenagers abroad do, the heady thrill of choice. The freedom to eat what she wanted, when she wanted. The ability to walk into a cafeteria and select from trays of pizza, burgers, or rich desserts. No one stopped her. No one told her no. No one reminded her of calories or weighed the consequences of indulgence. And for the first time, perhaps, she could taste what it was like to be just another young person making their way through adolescence without constant supervision. It might have started innocently enough, a chocolate bar here, a late-night snack with friends, second helpings of pasta or creamy sauces she'd never had before. But over time, those habits took root. Sofía, like so many others her age, began to rely on food not just for fuel but for comfort. Perhaps it was homesickness. Perhaps it was the pressure of schoolwork or trying to fit in. Or maybe, it was simply the joy of being able to say yes after so many years of no. Whatever the reason, by the end of the academic year, the changes in Sofía were not just subtle, they were visible. Her figure had changed, her energy had waned, and her overall physical condition had declined in ways that became apparent the moment she returned to Spain for the summer. When Queen Letizia saw her daughter again, it wasn't joy or relief that filled her heart, it was shock. She had expected to embrace her growing daughter with pride, but what she saw instead left her stunned. Letizia, always the picture of discipline, couldn't quite understand what had happened. How had Sofía, the child she had raised with such care, fallen into what she considered a state of physical neglect? The queen was, by her own admission, heartbroken. She had assumed her teachings would have held, that her daughter would have maintained the principles she'd learned at home. But Sofía had taken a different path, and Letizia didn't know whether to feel hurt, disappointed, or afraid. The reunion quickly turned into confrontation. There were words exchanged, serious, emotional words. Letizia questioned how her daughter could have disregarded everything she'd taught her. Sofía, perhaps overwhelmed or embarrassed, may have struggled to explain. What began as a conversation soon became an argument, the kind many parents and teenagers have had when their worlds, shaped by different environments, collide. But beneath the tension was a mother's worry. A deep concern not for image or status, but for health, for well-being, for the long-term consequences of seemingly small choices. In the days that followed, Letizia made a decision. She would not let this summer go to waste. She would act, not with the same rigid control as before, but with a new understanding of what her daughter needed. Rather than reinstating the same austere meals that had defined Sophia's childhood, she consulted the palace's medical team, dietitians and endocrinologists who were experienced in creating plans that could work not just for royalty but for real people with real habits. The goal wasn't punishment, it was restoration. A return to health. A rebalancing of body and mind. This time, the meals would still be healthy, but they would be enjoyable too. Full of flavor, variety, and designed to nourish in every sense of the word. Letizia began the new regimen the very next day. With quiet determination, she helped guide Sofía back to a routine, not one of restriction, but one of mindful eating, better sleep, and daily activity. The young Infanta wasn't placed on a crash diet. Nor was she shamed. She was simply reintroduced to a way of life that centered her physical and emotional balance. And to her credit, Sofía responded. Perhaps because this time, it wasn't just her mother's way, it was a collaborative effort. The teenage girl who had once eaten in secret now sat at the table with confidence, learning that health didn't have to mean denial. It could mean empowerment. This summer, then, has become a turning point. Not just for Sophia's health, but for the relationship between a mother and daughter learning to meet each other halfway. Letizia, in her steadfastness, has discovered the value of flexibility and compassion. And Sofía, in her newfound independence, has begun to appreciate the wisdom behind her mother's concern. Their journey speaks to something many older Americans understand well, that parenting never truly ends, and that the most lasting lessons are not the ones shouted or enforced, but the ones shared with love, patience, and grace. In a world where every headline tends to sensationalize or judge, the truth of this story lies in its simplicity. A young woman made choices. Her mother reacted with worry. They disagreed. They found a way forward. And somewhere in that quiet process, healing began, not just for Sophia's body, but for their bond. For those of us watching from afar, it's a reminder that no matter how grand the palace or famous the name, the struggles of parenting, growing up, and finding balance remain deeply human. And that, sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to loosen the reins, not to let go, but to let grow. As the summer days moved gently across the Spanish countryside, the rhythm of palace life seemed to soften. Mornings were slower, breakfasts more relaxed. The staff at Zarzuela Palace, long accustomed to routines dictated by protocol, noticed a subtle change. Queen Letizia, once always precise and measured, now lingered longer at the table with her daughters. She asked questions, not as a sovereign consort, but as a mother trying to understand the inner world of a young woman whose path had briefly diverged from her own. There were no more lectures, no harsh reminders about image or expectations. Instead, there were shared walks in the garden, long conversations in the shade of the olive trees, and moments of laughter that had long been missing. Sofía, for her part, began to open up in ways she never had before. She spoke about her time in Wales not with defensiveness, but with honesty. About how different it felt to not be a royal, just a student. How freeing it had been to eat dinner with classmates and make her own choices. But also, how confusing it became when there were no guardrails, how easily indulgence turned to excess, not out of rebellion but out of loneliness. It was something Letizia had not fully considered. That in her effort to protect her daughter from the world, she might have unintentionally left her unprepared for it. And in that quiet realization, something softened in Letizia too. She saw not a daughter who had failed her teachings, but a girl becoming a woman, trying to find her footing in a world that rarely shows mercy to those born into privilege. The queen began to understand that control and care were not the same. That true health was not only measured on a scale, but in confidence, joy, and self-respect. So the summer became a season of rebuilding, not just of fitness, but of trust. Meals became opportunities for connection, not correction. And while the menu remained balanced and thoughtful, it was now seasoned with a dash of kindness, a little olive oil here, a touch of lemon zest there. Simple flavors, like the conversations they now shared, warm, genuine, and deeply human. Let me know if you'd like me to continue the narrative to meet a larger character count, or turn this into a full-length short story or article.